I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, April 15, 2015 at 6:30 p.m. Our invocation tonight is by Dr. Rosenberg.
Our Father, be with us tonight as we endeavor to plan for the future. Guide us in your service. Be with us as we go about each day. We thank you for the opportunity to gather tonight. In your name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We have an established quorum: Councilman Nieto, Councilman Guerrero, Councilman Ortiz, Councilman Rodriguez, and Councilman Tejada. At this time, we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and Texas pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
At this time, I'd like to entertain any citizens' comments. And we have no citizen comments, so we're going to go on and get started. This is in regards to the restructure of the general obligation refunding bond, Series 2010, the Series 2010 bond. Who's going to go first?
Victor, we're trying to get everything lined up here, so Victor's going to go up first, Mayor. Mayor, for the record, can you note the 4A members that are here? For the record. If you could note the 4A members that are here for the record.
Sorry. Okay, 4A members present tonight are Stephanie Moore and Joe Tejada.
Thank you. You want to go to PowerPoint?
Yeah, but it was under,
E, you want to go to PowerPoint?
Victor, do you have another copy of this?
Yeah, we have brought multiple copies also.
You got it?
I know, I don't know what
You have that flash?
it's on here. There you go.
I got it.
Mhm.
Not showing me.
Well, thank you for having me here again this evening. For the record, my name is Victor Quiroga with Frost Bank, and we have the honor of representing you as your financial advisor. With me is Duncan Morrow with my office, and he also helps with the representation as financial advisor. We prepared a presentation for you to update the city and kind of remind the city and the 4A Corporation, I guess, where everything began with the financing of the event center, what we had to do in 2010 to restructure that, and then go to where we're at now, where we have to do the final restructuring. Now that we have a better sense of where your sales tax revenues are, which are better than what they were back in 2010. So we're just going to talk about the process, but a lot of it is just a lot of update. This information in front of you in that packet, if you recall back in July when we were doing that budget workshop, a lot of that is the same information. We just added some few pages at the end talking about what the next steps are to restructure the bonds. And throughout this presentation, just feel free to stop me if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer that. So here, this is the general obligation bonds that the city has right now that's outstanding. We have, of course, the general obligation refunding bonds since 2010, and that was primarily for the event center. The original intent was that 100% of that debt was going to be paid by the 4A Corporation. You can see there that the final maturity that when it was going to be structured to be paid off, but the 2020, it was actually going to meant to be longer, but we did that just as a temporary financing here in 2010, knowing that we would be here in 2015 to finally restructure it now that we have a better sense of where your sales tax collections are. The callable gate column there, basically what that is that's the first time we could refinance the bonds and take them away from the original investors without any type of penalty. And so you can see there the GO refunding bonds through 2010. We're past that call date, so now we're free to refinance and restructure those bonds without any type of penalty with the investor. Then we have the certificates obligation, 2008. That's the original financing where it all started. And then we'll talk about how we originally structured. But right now we have $2.9 million outstanding, and that's being shared 56% by the cities paying for that debt, and then 44% is being paid by the 4B Sales Tax Corporation. This is just a graphical look at your general obligation debt service. And whenever we say general obligation, what we mean is that those bonds that were issued by the city, the general obligation is that the security mechanism or the collateral that the bond investors have, whoever owns those bonds, is basically the city's property taxes or ad valorem taxes, meaning that you don't have to use property taxes to repay that debt. But if for some reason you default on your debt or something, then legally the bond investor could come and say, you have to raise your tax rating up to pay us from your ad valorem tax. That's just the security mechanism or the collateral. That's not to say that we're using property taxes to pay all of this debt. But you can see here it spikes up because that's the GO refunding since 2010. That's the first restructuring we did. We did that on purpose. We left it short because in 2010 we wanted to get the best interest rate for the city, knowing that we would come back later once we got a better sense where your sales tax collections are, and then restructure it again. And so that's why this has a short call date of 2014. That was all done on purpose so that we could come back and do that.
Victor, can I ask you a question on the prior slide, please? Okay, I just want to make it clear for the council that once we restructure, the only amount that we're going to restructure is the 4A
Yes.
bond, correct?
Correct.
Which will be the $5,377,000.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And Jeff Kuhn is here. He is with Fulbright and Jaworski. And his role is as a bond counsel when we move forward with the refunding of the bonds. Basically, the way it works is that the city council has the final say, but the real final say is with the attorney general, and there's legal documents have to be prepared and submitted. And so Jeff Kuhn and his office do that as the bond counsel representing the city, and so they'll be coordinating that with the attorney general's office.
Vic, if I can interrupt, I'm sorry I'm late. There's apparently a huge soccer match in downtown San Antonio, I guess U.S. play Mexico or something. I mean, it was trying to get on, I'm sorry I'm late. But I didn't miss too much because I see you're on slide 3.
Yeah, that's right.
You didn't have like another presentation with 100 slides in it, I've already missed it.
No, it was just 20 pages.
Okay.
So here now we come to the sales tax, the 4A Corporation. In 2007, the 4A Corporation, this was the first financing they did, and when they did this, they did it directly on their own, pledging their own sales tax collections. The proceeds for that original financing in 2007 was to purchase the land where the event center currently sits on. And so the financing was done just for the purchase of the land in 2007. This is just a graphical look at your the debt service payments for the 4A Corporation, just looking at the 2007 issue. This is for the land purchase. That was originally a 30-year note, and so they'll be paid off in 2037. One thing to note, what we did in 2007 is that we issued these bonds with what we call a taxable designation. We did that on purpose just in case there'd be some opportunities in the future for a private corporation to come in or build on it, and so we wanted to give you that flexibility. So there's always an option in the future to potentially refinance that if the intent is just for the city to go ahead and continue overseeing that and operating that. This is aggregate debt service summary. Here we have the general fund. We do have one tax note that we issued in 2008, but that'll be paid off during this fiscal year that we're in right now. And then you can see we have the GO refunding bonds. When we restructured the 08 bonds in 2010, we purposely put the annual payments at $100,000 because you had other, the Ford Corporation had other obligations they had to meet, and plus the sales tax wasn't as high as originally the city had projected. The $1.3 million payments that start next year were never meant to stay that way. They were meant to be restructured. But again, we tried to get a lower interest rate in 2010, and so we kept that debt short on purpose. But really, technically and legally, that debt is was issued by the city. Then we have here the 4A Corporation, the information that we showed you before. The average annual payment is approximately $84,000 to $85,000, and that's for the land purchase. Here, this is a self-supporting debt by fund source. Basically, the way it was originally structured, where the city would be responsible for the tax notes in 2008. They'd be responsible for a portion of the 2008 certificates of obligation. There you see the combination of those. Then we have the 4A sales tax fund, the 2007 sales tax revenue bonds, and of course the event center is under the GO refunding bond series 2010. And then the 4B sales tax fund, they participate in the 2008 issuance as well, the certificates obligation, so you can see what their portion is. And we'll break it down a little smoother on the next few slides here about who's taking care of what. And so just to start, I guess again, giving you a little history of where we're at and why we're here today. In 2008, the city issued $8.5 million in certificates of obligation. And that issuance, this is the total payment right here in this column for the 2008. Originally it was structured as a 20-year term, and you can see the payments were on purpose increasing as we go in time, and the thought was that with all the development happening in Floresville, that the sales tax and everything else would be growing as well, so we just wanted to kind of do a little bit proportional structuring there. But the whole debt is was originally going to be paid by three parties, because three parties are participating in those proceeds. The major participant was going to be the 4A Corporation. Of the $8.5 million, they utilized 59% of that borrowing, primarily for the event center and the construction of the event center. Then we have the 4B Corporation. They participate in 18% of the $8.5 million issuance, and you can see their annual payments there. And then the city also participated in it, and that was at a 23%. So they had 23% of that $8.5 million. And so this was the original breakdown of the three entities that were sharing in that one issuance of $8.5 million. This was the original percentage and where it was going to stay. Okay, and what occurred is that in 2010, the 4A Corporation, because sales tax were down and because a note was entered into to finance the equipment within the event center, couldn't meet its obligation. And we have the breakdown in the next slide too. But basically we came in, we stripped out the 4A Corporation's a portion of the 2008 issuance. Basically, we only restructured or took out the bonds from the 08 issuance that belonged to the 4A Corporation. We left the 4B Corporations and the city's annual debt service payments the same. We just stripped out the 4A Corporation's debt. And so you can see there, the payment structure, I'm going to go to the previous page real quick. You can see the 4B Corporation and the city. Those payments are about the same as to what happened after the structure. So we really didn't touch the 4B and the 4C's share. But now, instead of three participants in the 2008 certificates of obligation, now we just have two, the 4B Corporation and the city. And so we left those as is. We just went ahead and moved over the 4A Corporation's portion of that debt. And so this is what everything was kind of revolving around with the event center construction and the financing of it, is your sales tax. In 2008, when it was originally issued, the city collected just over $1.5 million in sales tax collections. You can see here, then it kind of stagnated in 2009 and 2010. The intent when the issuance occurred in 2008 was that the sales tax would grow because in previous years we had seen some significant growth in the sales tax. And so unfortunately that didn't happen, and then the financing, kind of equipment financing occurred, and so we got into a position where the 4A Corporation could not make its a portion of its debt payments for that 2008 issuance. The 4A Corporation gets a portion of the city's sales tax collections. About 25% of what the city collects goes to the 4A Corporation. And so you can see there, the annual payments were about $400,000, and that's about all that the corporation, the 4A Corporation, was collecting. And so that's what the bind that the city, the 4A Corporation was in. But fortunately, things have turned around in terms of the sales tax. You have the Eagle Ford Shell activity. A lot of it was responsible because of it, and development happening here in the city. But you can see here, as we moved along time, the sales tax collection for the city and 4A Corporation has grown, and has grown pretty significantly. This past year is at a $3.2 million sales tax collection for the city, and the 4A Corporation getting 25% of that. It's about $808,000 is what the 4A Corporation collected in the sales tax collections.
Victor, so if we're collecting 800 on the 4A, but we're collecting 16 on the 4B?
That's incorrect, Victor.
Yeah. Is that right?
It's a quarter of a
Yeah, I think
cent
that looks
on
more like
sales
the
tax.
four, that looks more like the 4B's collection.
Yes,
Yeah, 4A would be,
we're collecting on sales
yeah,
tax
4A would be half of that.
300,000.
Mhm. Yeah, we apologize about that if it's,
It looks good though.
yeah. Yeah, that,
Yeah, we got quarter 1% for the 4A.
Yeah.
Half of 1%.
Do you have the totals, Connie, with you for 14?
Yes.
2014 collected?
There's about 370 of them.
Or just, even the city's portion, it was, I think it was conflated by name.
We talked about the other night.
The other night we talked about it was about 800,000 just for 4B alone.
Yeah.
So 400 for the 4A, another 400 for 1.6. So I guess maybe 3.2 is right. 3.2 is right, but I think that's the 4B number that's there.
yeah,
But that was years ago.
Yeah.
I'm talking in tonight.
No, that was year to date. No, that was just for fiscal, the previous fiscal year.
Maybe.
I think the 3.2 is right.
Let me get mine.
Because if you figure 808, and then the other 808 is for the city, I mean, it's for the 4A and the streets, so that's 1.6, and then you double that for the city's portion, it's about 3.2. So it looks like the total collected is correct, but just the disbursement of the 808 should be the 4B's amount. That's what the 4B would be.
Because you got 2 quarters and a half.
2 quarters and a half, and then the whole for the city.
So the 808 is not a quarter, it's a half.
Yeah, 808 looks like a half.
808 sounds like that.
Right. You have it? You have yours?
You trying to incriminate me in something or just not?
But it's-
That's good. Oh, you're talking about the money borrowed? Well, then we bought like 3 cars. I didn't pay my house in full, it's just a portion of it.
We actually made a bigger house with that money.
Was it the water?
Do you have calculators? Can we do it with the calculators?
Is that why our street's not done yet?
Yeah. Mine's good too.
We're getting back to that country scene. You have to buy yourself a stagecoach and a horse.
See what they do?
Better shots.
Alcohol sales.
That's the 4B's collection, right?
Yes. And I can look at it and send you that.
We didn't get the, we didn't get the conversion.
No, I don't need it. I have it.
We blame it on Fulbright, he's not here.
So we apologize about that. We got the percentage wrong. I apologize about that. But yeah, that is the 4B corporations, and we just got a copy of the actual breakdown from the city. So the 4A would actually be half of that then, those collections.
So Victor, the 2014, the 3 million two is the complete 2%.
Yes.
The city's 1% plus the 4B is 0.5%.
Yeah, yeah.
The 4A 1/4%, and the street sales 1/4.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're working basically again with the $400,000 that were initially there.
The portion that the city got, do you know what specifically it was spent on?
For the original, the back in 2008. Yeah, a lot of it was utility system related, is what our notes had back in 2008, is the primary use for what the city had done then.
Is there a way of finding out exactly what it was spent on? Because I sure would like to know that.
When we get the documents, a lot of times in the legal documents, it has very general statements, and it's written like that on purpose to give you flexibility so that you're not stuck to spending it only on one thing. Jeff was not part of that transaction back then, but we could probably ask the state to see if we could get a copy of that ordinance if the city doesn't have it. But again, that ordinance is going to be pretty
If it's an
general.
ordinance, I can find
Yeah,
it.
we
But
have.
we'll look and see. Mayor, when you asked me earlier, I was just thinking about the Bank of America loan.
I think it was the water tower on B Street, actually.
Yeah.
Say again, please.
The water tower on B Street?
Oh, in 2008?
And so, but then we could see what if we have any other detail. A lot of the detail too would be in the finance department if they still have those files from back in 2008 to see where those disbursements
I want to go look for that ordinance, and if it's not in there, then
Yeah.
Mayor, I'm afraid when you look at the ordinance,
maybe
it's not gonna have that level of detail. The only way it may be is given that there were interlocal agreements where people were stepping up, there may be something contractually where the 4A, my share is X and the 4B is Y. You may be able to foot back into it, but I learned a long time ago, Councilman Tate, if you're on his memory, it's pretty good normally.
Spit it out, Luke.
But,
Well, that's the problem, that interlocal didn't get written.
oh, it didn't?
You got written but not signed.
So the 4A has a payment obligation, but not a contractual obligation, right? But everyone's
That's the one that's footnoted in that document you sent me the other day from the TMR. There's a reference to the interlocal. And I think it says generally what you're talking about, but the document didn't get.
Now, I don't know, is the 4A board also in here?
Yes.
Or eight.
Two members.
With the, I guess in this case, just so if we need to, for lack of a better term, put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? Probably should, for everyone's benefit, get something signed, if you're on that one, because I mean. it's
Well,
a
that was
pro-
part of the reason for the lease that I just went through tonight, so that the obligation to operate.
Go back to meeting minutes or agendas, it's all there.
Yeah, I would suggest, like I said, I'm not getting in the middle of your meeting here, but I would say if everyone knows what was supposed to happen, everyone would be better served to have the 4A now signing a local agreement. So we're very clear on what the obligation is and moving forward. If it's, I'm a little surprised that the auditor doesn't have it. I mean, the CAFR's pretty clear on what the payment, this is what they said it was, and normally the auditors I know would want to sign agreement, but I mean, so not to change it, but I mean, I hope there is not a serious, I mean, if the agreement is to say what you just said, Victor, then the 4A board should be willing to, if it wasn't documented in 2008, we should certainly document it in 2015. Lou, you wouldn't have a problem with that, right?
So now going back to the history of the 4A and why the payments had to be restructured 2 years down the line is there was a $500,000 5-year note that's about to be paid off, correct, Ms. Moreno, on the Bank of America? So that frees up that $100,000 commitment. And that was taken to equip the community center that was just built. And then, of course, the below budget sales tax collection impacted, you know, the ability for the 4A corporation to obviously meet its commitments. And so there we have the breakdown of the land payment of $84,500 for that upcoming year. The community center about $375,000. And then in came the Bank of America loan that added about $100,000 to that annual commitment. And so for that particular year, upcoming year, the total commitments were $559,000 for that. And so there you can see the difference. Obviously there was a deficit there that wasn't being able to be met, and so at that time the decision by the city was made to, you know, let's go ahead and restructure that debt to minimize that payment. And so back in 2010 there were, as we talked about during the workshop, there were alternatives back then to not have to conduct the restructuring. Number one was to raise the property tax rate and have the city collect the revenues through its property taxes to pay for that shortfall. And of course, number two, which isn't advisable, is that the city, you know, could have defaulted on that debt and then there would have been legal consequences after that. So obviously that's not an advisable option. So the easiest one would have been for to raise the tax rate increase, but I know the tax rate has been pretty much steady here for a long period of time. And back then in 2010, that was the intent to keep it level as well. Here now we're in credit ratings. When we issued the COs in 2008, we didn't have to get a credit rating because we sold directly to the end holder of that. That's called the private placement sale method. In 2010, because of the financing tool that we used and the structure that we used, we went ahead and utilized a public sale method, and RBC Capital Markets bought those bonds from the city. We went through a rating process because you have to do that when you sell bonds in the public market. At that time, Standard & Poor's rated us, and this is the categories, the investment grade category that Standard & Poor's uses, with triple B being the lower end of that investment grade all the way to AAA. And when we went through that rating process in 2010, S&P assigned the city an A-minus credit rating. And so you can see where the A-minus falls on this chart here. That's the definition of average security, but more subject to adverse financial and economic developments. What had happened is that in 2013, every 2 to 3 years, Standard & Poor's will reevaluate the city and do what we call a surveillance call. At that time, there's deteriorating financials with the city, and so because of it, they decided to downgrade us as a city from an A- to a triple B rating. The reasoning that they provided back in 2013 for that downgrade was they felt, and this is from Standard & Poor's, this isn't from me, that there's a lack of willingness to align the revenues with spending. Basically, they didn't feel that the city was willing to increase the tax rate and create revenues to meet its obligations through operations and its debt. Lower than budgeted revenues and higher than budgeted expenditures. Adequate wealth and income levels, moderately high overall net debt burden, and also elevated debt service. And so those are the primary reasons why Standard & Poor's in 2013 decided to downgrade the city. And again, at that point, the fund balance for the city was at a negative level, and it just happened all at the same time there. So moving forward, now that the bonds are callable and now we have a better sense of the sales tax collection, is the plan was to not have that payment as is, because right now it's going to jump up to $1.3 million. The plan was to get a better sense of what your sales tax collections stand and then readjust your payments going forward. And that's going to, originally when we talked about this past couple of years, that was scheduled to happen this spring in 2015. And also we're trying to attain the best and lowest interest rate. And in order to do that, the city has to continue making its strides, as we talked about last summer, on its turnaround plan. And the city is ahead of schedule with regards to that turnaround plan. Right now, the city is showing through your latest audit that you're in the black again with your general fund. You're in the positive, and so that's ahead of schedule than what was originally intended in the turnaround plan. So that's good, and that'll reflect well as we start moving forward with the issuance process and talking to the rating agencies. Because when they had that downgrade on us, that's when we had a negative fund balance in that general fund, and that was one of the big reasons too. And so here, this is a sales tax revenue. Here, this is the debt that we're looking at, but of course, we're going to adjust the sales tax collections from our calculation there. And here, we just ran different options, but again, we apologize about the sales tax collection. That was an error on my part. And so here we know that we have about $85,000 that we have to pay for the land that the 4A Corporation financed in 2007. Instead of a $1.3 million payment, there's different restructuring options that the city could consider with this upcoming, we're going to call the Series 2015 General Obligation Refunding Bonds. And so here we just ran different levels. I think the 20, 25, and 30 year, which we'll run to, are going to be more feasible for the 4A Corporation. The intent is still to utilize those revenues to repay that debt. And so you can see there, if we look at the 25-year repayment, the new payment, instead of a $1.3 million, could now be an annual payment of about $385,000 there. And so you can see the total requirement there of about $470,000 for the 2007 issuance and then the 2015 restructuring. Again, the intent was not to have that payment stay at $1.3 million. The intent was to restructure it and to see, how much we could reduce that payment so it could be more affordable for the 4A Corporation and the city to handle. This is at 1.3. And so we'll readjust those figures. Having to restructure bonds is never pleasant, and it's not something that cities always want to do or strive to do. But you know, the good news is that we're in a very low, historically low interest rate environment right now. So us having to do this restructuring, the timing worked out for us in terms of the market conditions. Because right now, as you can see here, this is just looking back to 1981. You can see the average bond buyer 20-year GO index that we use.
Yes, Victor, quick question. On the 40 coverage matrix, were you still figuring that on a triple B rating? Or?
Yeah, we were figuring that we'll get a triple B, but we're also, we believe that because the debt is supported by ad valorem taxes and property taxes, that's the safest credit mechanism or security mechanism for bond investors. We're also hoping that when we move forward with this, we'll make applications to bond insurance companies. And what that means is that these bond insurance companies have a higher rating than the triple B or even the A- rating. Our hope is that since these are essentially taxed back and the collateral is the property taxes, that these would be eligible to get what we call a bond insurance policy. What that means basically is that for a one-time insurance premium that you pay, instead of marketing our bonds at the triple B level, or if the Standard & Poor's gives us an upgrade back to the single A level where we're at in 2010, and we'll run the economics too, we'll do a cost-benefit analysis, but so basically if we pay an insurance company a premium, what that does for us in our marketing of these bonds is we get to use their credit rating. And so a lot of these insurance companies are at the AA credit level, and so basically what that means is that the higher the credit rating you have, the better interest rate you're going to get on your financing. And so we're still in the process of developing the documents, and so those applications are about to be made once the city decides, you know, how we're going to go about restructuring and what type of terms we're going to set on the new 2015 financing. And so the numbers are based on that. And so here, this is just a bond sale process. I know many of you weren't here in 08 and 2010. But basically, the city of Floresville would, again, issue the bonds. They would go through an underwriter. RBC Capital Markets did a great job. They know the area back in 2010. And so they're basically, the way this works is they're essentially the middleman. They're not the ones that are going to be holding the bonds for their own investment portfolio. What they do is they turn around and sell those bonds to different mutual fund companies and insurance companies, people that buy tax-exempt bonds often. And then in return, we get the cash that goes to the paying off of the 2010 bondholders. And of course, financial advisor, we help you with the structuring of it and getting into the market. And of course, at Norton Rose Fulbright with Jeff Kuhn's office will be responsible for the legal documents in that process. So this is essentially how the bond sale process works using the public sale method that we talked about. So we'll go ahead. Talk to S&P again. In fact, they want to talk to us as early as next week and have a rating call with us and the staff just to see where things stand so that we could give them an update, which will be a good update because now we're in the positive with respect to your general fund balance. When they last talked to the city, we were still in the negative and in the red for that. So we're hopeful. I can't obviously promise anything. I'm not the one doing the analysis, but we're hopeful that there'll be some improvement. But we'll just go through that process and see. Here are the timetable events. We've already actually gotten a head start on the preliminary documents. I know Jeff Kuhn's office returned some comments to us already on the initial draft documents. When we sell these bonds, we develop what we call an official statement, and that's just basically a document showing everything about the city, the legal authority to issue these type of bonds, and the financial information regarding the city and the 4A corporation, and that's what the underwriters use to market these bonds to their bond investors. Because it's considered a refunding, the state allows the city council just to have to meet one time to do one action item. And that could happen as early as next Thursday on April 23rd, where the council would say, okay, we know we need to restructure this and move forward with the refinancing. Go ahead and start moving forward so long as it meets certain terms that the city wants to utilize on the refinancing. If you want to do a 25-year or whatever term that you want to use on this. And so before, what we would have to do, we'd probably have to come to the council twice. The second time being that we've already entered the market, locked in the rate, and the council now has to give its final approval. With the refunding, the state allows you to go ahead and just set parameters on the transaction, and so long as when we're ready to enter the market, we're within those parameters, then you delegate that authority to the city manager and/or the mayor to sign the final documents and lock in the interest rate based off of what terms that you wanted to see the city in its new financing. And so it gives basically a little bit more flexibility for the city to enter the market when it best suits the city and its taxpayers to get the lowest interest rate possible.
The parameters you said being the interest rate as well as the terms?
Yeah, the terms basically, how much are we going to borrow, how long are we going to go out, and Jeff, you want to?
Yeah, the four parameters we need under Texas law is the not to exceed principal amount or the refinancing amount. The second is the maximum term. The third is the maximum coupon, what is the interest rate. And the last and most difficult for you guys is you're going to have to say how much money we're willing to lose, not to exceed blank dollars. Based on those parameters, then, because that basically structures the whole transaction. Principal amount can't be more than X, the final maturity can't be more than Y. I don't know, Victor is looking for y'all's business decision next on that. The next is the interest rate is most people use either 5 or 6% today when you think you're going to get
3 or 4.
something else. And then because it is a restructuring, after debt service savings, you have to plug in the maximum amount of money that you're going to lose on the restructuring. And the Texas Attorney General, in their review, will make sure that the City Council was aware at the time you do the ordinance that there was going to be a loss, and obviously there is going to be a loss.
And where would this loss come from? From just the?
As you extend the debt, you're going to be paying a lot more debt service on your 2015 bonds than you would on your 2010 bonds. And so that, when you compare those two debt services, there's going to be a loss.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I mean, it's going to be substantial, I think.
Yeah, and because mostly, you're going from what was supposed to be a 5-year repayment, now you're switching it out. And so that's where the loss will incur because you're paying more interest as, time goes on with this longer debt issuance.
Victor, like your slide on slide 17, if you want to pull it back to that. So right here, what you're looking at from 2016 to 2020, those are the projected payments.
Yes.
So if we stayed on that schedule, that's the money that we paid over the
Yes.
5-year note of the loan. But when we switch to 25, of course, it's going to lower the payment but increase the interest on top of the
That's
principal.
right, that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And this payment stays stable.
Yeah, once you do it in 2015, then you're going to get a fixed interest rate and it stays stable. The standard, typically when you issue long-term bonds, there's going to be a protection mechanism for the bond investors. The standard protection feature is going to be 10 years, where the first 10 years, we can't come back and restructure again. We'd have to wait. We could negotiate a shorter call period to, let's say, 5 years, but the shorter call period you go, the little higher interest rate you have to pay to have that flexibility. But again, and that's why we just want everybody to be on the same page about what term do we want to restructure, because if we want to get the best interest rate possible, we'll probably have to use that 10-year call feature. And so there's going to be that period of 10 years where we can't really go back and redo it again like we did in 2010. In 2010 it was a little easier because of the way we sold it in 2008 and doing that. So but that's something we could
For our next meeting, can you get the figures from the original loan from 2010? Because
Yes.
if we look at the loss from this loan, it looks more significant, but I mean,
Yeah.
the loan was never intended to be paid off in 10 years anyways.
No,
The
that's
original-
correct.
What was the original loan?
It was 20 years originally.
Okay, so it was 20 years originally,
Yeah.
so the maturity date being 2030.
Yeah, so this is the breakdown here. So, yeah, you can see the 28 originally was going to be the final payoff date. You can see this was the original event center debt service.
So in actuality, right now, if we go the 25-year route, then we extended it by 10 years?
Mhm.
The land itself, Victor, when is that? I know it could be one on the bonds on the land and bonds on the building. So 2037 for the building, so the building, the land, I'm sorry, the land,
The
we pay
land is
2037.
2037 here.
Victor, on slide 18, if we adjust the sales tax collection back to 50% of the 808, then the total debt requirement, the collections won't meet the debt requirement.
Yes, yeah, and that's where we're gonna revise.
What I'm saying is if we're collecting 404
Mhm.
and the debt is 521,
Yeah, then there'll be above, yeah, this is an error on our part about using the sales tax collection.
okay, so then the bond payment will be different also?
Yeah, we're gonna show that, we're gonna rerun two more options, the 25 and then the 30 year to see those two options. I apologize that we used the wrong revenue.
Okay, so all this is wrong right here.
Yeah, that's where we're gonna revise. We apologize about that. That hardly ever happens. We're sorry about that. And so we're going this figure here to see, but really, if the 4A is gonna, if you want the 4A to cover everything, the land and the event center on its own, then you probably have to go longer to do that. Because I think right now the city has been helping the 4A corporation with.
And one thing, I mean, just to kind of go off course a little bit, Victor, we're looking at the strictly sales tax revenue, and that's why it's important, when we're dealing with, like, setting up the tourist and visitor board and, the promoters, and we know what the center can do now off of weddings and quinceañeras, but we've got to look past that. As a 4A board and city council, we've got to look at, start promoting bigger picture, because the only way to overcome this debt is by, generating revenue. Okay, we know what the sales tax is going to bring in. More than likely, hopefully it stays on that projection line, or at least collecting 400,000 and doesn't descend from there. But everything after that has to be from revenue generated from the actual building. And when the building was originally constructed, I mean, that was the whole purpose of it, not just to go off the sales tax and go from there. So that's why it's important we, restructure this, and then after that, start promoting the center and moving forward.
Victor or Jeff, in the restructuring, it's sales tax, can we also use hotel motel tax for the debt?
Well, it wouldn't be part of the pledge,
Okay,
but you could,
it could be utilized, but not part of the ordinance.
you don't want to give any more to the bondholder than you already given them. And I think, but I mean, if I understand what Victor's saying, when back in 2008, players were here, they said, hey, these are the things we want to do. We want to buy the land, we want to build a facility, and we never want to have to levy an ad valorem tax for it. Which I think that ended up being true. You didn't, right? There hadn't been an ad valorem tax levy, right? So that part of it's good. I mean, to the extent that the city wants to use maybe some portion of its 1% sales tax or hot tax, right? As a safety net under the 4A.
Okay, but not as part of the ordinance.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to give the bondholders, you're already giving the bondholders the best credit because they're giving the ad valorem tax pledge.
Okay. And to follow up on Councilman Niepo's comment, is there any restriction from the 4A corporation using hotel motel tax to increase in revenue?
Well, the hotel motel tax would be city revenues, not the 4As.
Okay, and how could they, is there a way they could do that?
Well, I'd have to look at it because,
It's one of the 9 eligible costs, but it's the council's decision.
yeah, like I said, I'm assuming that.
Say
they
the
most-
4A corporation wanted to have some type of event out there.
Right. And the city wanted to support that event through the transfer of some portion of its hot tax.
Right.
I mean, legally, I can look at that, but Mayor, and academically, I think that works. But the city can't cede its control of the hot tax in the 4A.
Okay.
But it certainly could, for lack of a term, safety net, supporting,
And that is, Jeff, one of the issues that we faced, and that is operating the event center. We've had an awful lot of local events, but not major events that bring in major revenue.
so lots of people are happy because you're having quinceañera, your weddings and whatnot. So people enjoy having that venue in Floresville. They're just not generating a lot of sales tax dollars from it.
Exactly.
Nor hot tax.
Nor hot tax.
But I would just say this, just looking at the numbers, certainly on the city side, certainly there's been an explosive growth in its 1% sales tax. So I mean, like I said, I don't know what the cities, I'm sure people are always looking out for the money, right? But I mean, I'm saying that certainly there's been, under the projections that Victor laid out, certainly the 1% sales tax that the city's receiving has been very explosive. So I mean, into a positive. And I'll say this, after reading the preliminary official statement today, that Victor often did a nice job, because it's a hard one to draft, because there's a lot of moving pieces. But like I said, just Councilman, maybe looking at the city council's level, if you're looking at HOT and you're looking at maybe 1% sales tax, maybe there's a way for the city council to incentivize something positive at the event center. I will say this, the other thing, and I don't know who came up, not to step on a toe, but whoever called that plan an insolvency wasn't in the city's best interest to basically say, we're bankrupt. I mean, you're not, you know? And so, you know, I think we should all get away from that term.
Well, I think, Victor, you suggested the turnaround plan, I mean.
Yeah, and I like my term, the turnaround
Yeah,
plan.
I do too.
I didn't come up with the insolvency plan.
Because the fact of the matter is, it is turned around. When you look at the financial position that is in the document that I sent to Ms. Turner and Ms. Moreno today, there's been a lot of really positive things.
I think it's gone in the positive direction in the time that, you know, in a short amount of time that we've been working at it.
It's very clear that people tighten their belt very quickly and move positively. And that's,
You know, Jim Miller's had better ideas, but.
Hey, I wasn't here, y'all can't look at me.
Yeah, I wasn't here either, so I call it insolvency plan.
Either me, Ms. Turner, I wasn't here either. So, but like I said, we're all here together now to solve the problem. And so I think the, you know, the idea is we are blessed with the reasons Victor said, with you know, lots of revenues, and we have lots of needs. I mean, we're looking to do pretty substantial things with the USDA for our utilities. So it's not that we don't have needs, but maybe there's a way